So anyway, woke. Woke means having awakened. Woke, awake. This is, let's not complicate the matter here. Woke means having awakened to a view of reality that is based on structural oppression, and in particular that oppresses people like me to the exploitative benefit of people like them. Right. That's all woke means. Reality is the left woke calls it critical consciousness. You now have a critical consciousness of how the world is organized, but it's an oppressor versus oppressive.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna stop it. I'm gonna stop. I hate that stupid fucking word. I hate that word so much. I hate the word woke for that reason, because James Lindsay just did what he said he didn't like to do. He just described intersectionality and then said that that was just what wokeness is in general. And he could have just said, no, that's intersectionality. And woke is this broad term that includes social progressivism and intersectionality and X, Y, and Z and oppressor and oppressee. That's not like, oh, George Orwell would have a field day with this. Like, this is so stupid. That entire term is stupid. So now I've now hopped off the bandwagon because whatever James Lindsay says next, I don't care. He's already started off at a stupid standpoint from my point of view. I'm sorry, you can't. This is why we shouldn't use catch-all terms for like broad and like nebulous ideologies or ideas when we're trying to talk about specific things, right? I would argue that wokeness would be a synonym to like hyper-progressivism, but that's more than just intersectionality, right? If he's referring to intersectionality and these guys are oppressing these guys, or it's them versus me, then it's going to be very, very difficult to map a woke right into a right-wing phenomenon. You can map social justice warriors onto a right-wing phenomenon. You can do that. I mean, it's very, very easy to do. All you have to do is look at the Satanic Panic and like what Jack Thompson hating video games, like those kind of movements. You can look at those and be like, that's an example of like a right-wing SJW right there. You can do that, but not with this weird nebulous term that in and of itself is already poorly defined.
Well, I think part of the problem with the definition is that it involves, like, something is essentially woke if you're aware of this sort of oppressor-oppressed dynamic between two different groups of people. But that doesn't allow for the possibility that that could be a legitimate awareness, that awareness could be entirely valid. It could be simply an observation of a reality. I mean, there certainly have been people that have been oppressed by others in history, and so just the whole to essentially define woke as simply this notion of this dynamic between this oppressor or oppressed. In my view, that's extremely myopic, because that entirely delegitimizes one from ever having, well, a legitimate complaint of oppression, right? I certainly think that there are groups of people that are legitimately being oppressed by what I would describe as what would often be described as leftist political goals. You know, it's here, let us ban you from arming yourself in the defense of yourself and your family, and if you dare harmlessly 3D print guns in your basement, we're going to throw you in prison onto Rikers Island for 15 years. I consider that to be oppression, and I'm aware of that oppression, and I consider the people who perpetuate those rules to be oppressors. And I think that their just deserts are ultimately to face violence and retribution as recompense for the violence that they have visited upon others. Does this make me woke? I mean, I guess by this definition I could be woke, but I think that it's simply just being aware of actual real-world oppression between different groups of people, which is something that's real. I think that's part of the task of political science, is to try and mitigate that, to try and use force and power not for the sake of oppression, but for the benefit of people.
Well, that's like what a lot of people's... Spiney, I'll let you go. I've already kind of given my spiel on this. I'll let you go.
I think you guys are actually hitting on some of the things that I kind of mean by why I was not disregarding, but challenging what James is talking about, where this overly broad definition of the term woke, which, again, when your definition becomes so broad, it almost becomes meaningless. The lack of recognition that you could actually have an oppressor, and it's not necessarily, my view of woke, for example, are people who are seeing oppression in everything, like an orange juice label. That label is oppressing me, because why would they dare put this image of whatever on an orange juice carton? And that is, to me, the specific definition of what a woke person would do. Somebody who's woke. I am upset that maple syrup has a certain person on it. It's not the equivalent of like Asian students have to score way higher to get into a university.
Yeah.
If somebody's complaining about that on the political right, that's the problem. That's actual oppression. That's not complaining about an unreal oppression or something that you're labeling an oppression. That is just, oh, come on, that's just life. Tall oppression, good-looking oppression. More those things are the kind of things I would account as more of a woke form of identification of these societal problems. And I think James' definition is so broad.
Yes, and I think, I really do believe that using the term right-wing SJW is much better, because I think we all understand what the term social justice warrior means. We all understand what that, when I say that, everybody thinks of Trinity Puff, everybody thinks of Big Red, everybody thinks of all these almost caricatures of stances that happen to be real people, and like the absurd outcry over the simplest things, for example, that happens whenever you have individuals who are trying to bear their all for causes that are not real and or are far overshot in their importance, right? I would say that like another good example of this would be what happens right around this time of year every year, where Christians say there's a war on Christmas, when like that's just not a thing that really happens. Like that's not like you'll get like one manger that they say like you shouldn't be able to put up, and then you'll do the research in it, and it's like, oh well, they put it up in front of a public school, like that's why. But it's not because somebody was like, you know what, I hate Jesus. Like that's not what happened. All of us here as atheists, we could probably all say like, hey, that's pretty dumb. Let them have their manger display. I don't really give a damn. But like,
I do give a damn if my taxpayer dollars are going to it. That's when I do give a damn.
Maybe, but like I'm saying, like if a church like went out of their way to put one up in front of a public school, I'd be like, I don't care. This means nothing to me.
There's something that Thomas Jefferson said a while ago, which I think oftentimes the religionists on the right and the I guess secular dogmatists of the left continuously fail to realize, and that's, well, I think in his words, to compel a man to pay for the propagation of ideas that he fundamentally abhors is sinful and wrong. I might be butchering the quote, but ultimately that's essentially what both of these sides have attempted to do recently. Like in Oklahoma right now, they're trying to make the Bible and religion be part of the curriculum. And in the past, with the whole LGBT thing of, oh, well, we want to teach kids about being a tranny and why being a tranny is important. It's like, why? Why is this necessary for the public schools? Why is this necessary for the kids' education? It doesn't. It seems like it's just ideological indoctrination. It's just dogmatism, which really. I think that these terms woke and SJW, like you say, oh, these are right-wing SJWs. James Lindsay says these are woke right-wingers. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just irrational dogmas on both the left and the right. It's just dogmas that are not reasoned, dogmas that have no basis in reality. They're just
yes, but you can't put those in a bumper sticker. Come on.
Well, I mean, I guess I could put on a bumper sticker against dogma or defy dogma. Those are definitely things you could put on a bumper sticker. So even then, it could be made to be catchy. I mean, we already have a word for this. It's dogma.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree. I don't necessarily think that this term will cause more infighting, but I do think it will cause further confusion. Which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I just think it's kind of stupid. You know what I mean? Like it's unnecessary. I struggle to see where this.
Right? Yeah, definitely. I agree.
Yeah.
That's a silly term. It's a nonsense term.
Yeah.
At this point,
It's
woke
like-
is kind of a nonsense term, though. Because now woke means almost anything. You know, to some people, just being an atheist is woke. It's like, really, like, I like shooting, I like freedom, I like individual liberty, I'm against the left and pretty much everything, and yet now I'm woke because I don't believe in God. That's just nonsense.
Yeah, John, I've met you in person multiple times. You're the most woke person I've ever met.
Oh yeah.
You ask the pronouns of every person you ever pass. You actually even tip your fedora and say hello, madam, whenever a woman steps in front of you. You have a fedora.
Oh yeah.
For this example, you have one.
That's my fedora, my spectral fedora. It's of the emperor's variety. It's an emperor's fedora.
Yes, in fact, you're so progressive that because I'm disabled, you even allowed me to use your back as a riding platform to get up steps when I couldn't do it. You know that's how progressive you are. But anyway, I mean, Spiney, in terms of kind of going back to this video, because I have a bad feeling that we're gonna probably end up predicting everything that's going to be said here. Is James Lindsay, in your opinion, going to basically say this thing doesn't have a firm definition yet, but I'm afraid of it anyways because it could have a firm definition?
I would say that's already happening. I think even if you follow his Twitter feed and the challenges he seems to be waffling back and forth on it. And by the way, at the very end of this video, he sort of admits that it's sort of a maybe a bad term or a bad definition. And this is, I wonder why it's caused, let's say, his friction with other people out there. It's like, why are you having this friction over this one term? It's like you desperately want to apply. This is why I said about this idea of this false balance between things. It's like you desperately want to apply this thing that we've identified on the left that we see as bad and say it also exists on the right in the same way. Well, it doesn't. So the people who have contended with him on this issue, he's blocked on Twitter. He's, whatever. It's like, well, what are you doing this for? What is this all about?
Yeah, what's the point?
There's ulterior reasons in all of it. I think a lot of people who would identify as liberal, like James Lindsay does, is very concerned about where he sees the future going. Not so much for stamping out, say, socialism, communism, whatever on his side. He's an arch anti-communist, and the stuff he writes and does about that, I'm mostly all on board with. The problems he's identifying with that being injected into everywhere in society. But this desperate attempt to try to make a same problem happening on the right is probably because he looks at as liberalism as this centrist ideology that we need to return to. And I don't remember who it was made this statement about him, that he wants to return back to 1990s state of liberalism. American 1990s liberalism. That's where we need to go back.
It sounds like Sargon, but I don't know. It sounds like it, because Sargon and him have been the forefront. Sargon being the forefront right-winger saying this is just wrong, and then James obviously fighting back on it. Those two have been going at it the most, or everybody else in the space. I mean, but
Sargon to me seems to be openly now at this point practically poo-pooing the entire Enlightenment period. Like
no, he is, but that's like his point. Is like that he's saying you want us to return to something we used to believe in that's no longer relevant and or needed. I mean, that's kind of his current stand. His current standing is insane, but we've already kind of dissected or even tried to dissect Sargon's brain on liberalism, which took like 6 hours to do.
So, interestingly enough, though, Sargon has stuff to say about this. He made a video about James Lindsay's claims about woke riot, and Sargon's takes are also kind of piss poor there. We could, after we get through this video, at some point we could possibly get around to looking at that video. But one thing Sargon says that really strikes me as being super smooth brand is he's like, I don't have an ideology. I'm just a traditionalist, right? As if traditionalism isn't an ideology, and as if it's just some sort of obvious thing, what the thing that traditionalism prescribes, even though traditionalism is entirely, ideology and context dependent. It's like, what traditionalism are you talking about? You're talking about, now obviously for Sargon, he's talking about English traditionalism, right? But he's not talking about the English traditionalism of the ancient Celts. I guess you couldn't even call that English traditionalism, to be fair. But I mean, what time period of traditionalism is he even talking about? He's talking about like, let's go back to the time of Shakespeare, make the Spanish Armada sink again, or is he talking about being an Englishman in the fashion in which Tolkien was an Englishman in the early 20th century? It's like, what traditionalism are we going for? And that really is the big glaring weakness in Sargon's position. Is one, he doesn't even properly understand liberalism, and he wants to discredit and reject the entire philosophical tradition on the basis of Rousseau. He always gets back to Rousseau as his argument against liberalism, which is really sad because he's essentially attempting to dismiss Locke on the basis of Rousseau, which obviously is irrational. But then his fallback, his ideology, he attempts to shield from criticism by pretending he doesn't even have an ideology. He's like, no, I just think we should just do what's traditional. And then he just leaves it at that. Doesn't, without elaborating. It's like the weakest position someone could embrace.
Yeah, there is no... I watch a lot of the Lotus Eaters, and I have to say that one thing I find is that there is very limited... How can I put it? When you say, like you said, when you say traditionalism, what do you mean exactly? What particular type? And there seems to be quite the debate on there consistently as to like what they all have different takes on what they mean by traditionalism.
Yeah,
and that's this again comes to the big problem with using this term woke as this like carry-all placeholder for behavior you don't like. Yeah. You know, it means nothing at some point. It means nothing.
Unfortunately, Sargon's, in my opinion of Carl, has gone down dramatically since he came out as an anti-liberal, and also since he apologized to Jess Phillips. Both those things made me kind of lose a lot of. I still love the man, and I still am very grateful to him. I think he's very intelligent, but I don't know what the hell he's doing. And that's okay. I don't have to understand everybody, and I'd love to be able to talk to him about it someday. I would say the thing that really infuriates me that Sargon does do, and I see a lot of right-wingers doing this now, is staking a claim on almost pulling, you know how in America we have like the quote-unquote myth of the Great Switch, how like the people in the South all of a sudden became Republicans, and the people in the North all of a sudden became Democrats, and like that's where the Democrats are the way they are now, and the Republicans are the way they are now, and that was the Great Switch after like not too long after the Civil War, and you had like the Dixiecrats and everything else, which is true that those are real things, but that this was like some reflective state of real American politics that made the biggest change in the history of mankind, basically. They do this now, but with like liberal ideas, turning them into conservative ideas, when it's just not true. So, like, trying to say that like conservatives throughout history have embraced free speech, or that that's a conservative ideal somehow, some way, like Carl does now, is kind of like, no, this was not a no. Like, this was not a thing you guys did. You can't take credit for it.
What do you mean by conservative? Because there are conservatives who, throughout history, have been stalwart defenders of free speech. People, the William F. Buckleys and also the Barry Goldwaters of the world. but that's also
Oh, of
because
course.
those conservatives are liberals. Right?
Yes,
They're
they
not
embrace a
liberals in
liberal
the
value.
yeah, they're not liberals in the modern American sense, in the zero political literacy American sense of, oh, all the people who want to ban guns are liberals sense. But rather they're liberals in the sense in which they are at least in somewhat they're ideological heirs of the American tradition of liberty, which the comes from Thomas Jefferson's, the Thomas Paines, the Benjamin Franklin's, ultimately the John Locke's of the world, right? That's liberalism. American conservatism is just a form of liberalism that has been at odds with another form of liberalism, which is a more Rousseauian and Benthamite form of liberalism, right? So really, the problem is that the terms themselves can be quite fluid, right? Because if we're talking about conservatism in the American context, we're talking about a ideology that takes a lot from Lockean liberalism. But if we're talking about conservatism in like a really old school sense, as in a Sir Robert Filmer type of monarchism, then if that's what we're defining as conservatism, well, then American conservatism has like nothing in common with it. So it's really difficult to pin these things down. So instead of just painting in broad brushes, be like, oh, conservatism this, liberalism that, I find it far more useful to actually talk specifically about the topic at hand, about the implications of the topic at hand, and to derive conclusions based upon the logical relationships between the concepts as we can define them.
I would agree with that. I think that's part of the problem. Is I would echo the sentiment that especially today, American conservatives are liberals of like 1975. What would be considered a lefty in 1975, and I think a lot of people don't seem to realize it. And one of the issues I think we are saying, maybe this is what James Lindsay's reacted to, is this notion, a term that I heard, and it says one of the big problems with a lot of Republicans or a lot of conservatives is that they just act sometimes as a speed bump for progressives. They're not really conservatives because they're not maintaining anything. They're just slowing down what progressives actually want. So what can look something like James Lindsay, like somebody might want to say, I know you're a Second Amendment guy, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the courts about getting rid of like a lot of standard thinking, a lot of laws regarding firearm ownership. Really sort of restoring what might be an old style, or perhaps not even old, but a new look at what our rights are under the Second Amendment. To somebody like James, that may look like a right-wing woke thing, this panic that the government's going to take your guns, and it's like, well, we have an amendment in the Constitution that says we have the right to keep and bear these things, and yet there's a billion laws out there that pass not just by liberal Democrats but some Republicans that say to restrict our right. Is that a woke progressive thing to say? I think we need to return to the founding fathers, or is that a regressive thing because you want to return to this what you may perceive as an original meaning of what that right is? Does James Lindsay view as a woke take, like a panic, a sense of oppression? I mean, the Second Amendment community is always basically talking about government of the ATF oppression, but is it illegitimate? Is it worrying about pancake labels? No.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully James doesn't have that perspective about Second Amendment activists. I mean, if he does, if he applies that reasoning to like Second Amendment, then I guess pretty much that would be a problem. But I mean, it is, and that's the thing, is there's a lot of dismissiveness about this. It is a legitimate fear to look at government and to look at the things they try to do and look at the maneuverings of politicians and be like, well, you're clearly attempting to strip me of my guns. It's like Kamala Harris on the campaign trail. At one point, she's promising to use executive orders to establish mandatory gun buybacks. And the next thing you know, oh, I have a gun. I would never take away your gun. And then everyone's, like, the whole mainstream media is just bludgeoning you with this, oh, you're just paranoid for thinking that she would take away your gun, even though she straight up said that she would do it. And then all you have to do is look to other countries where progressives achieved their goals. You know, like look at Canada right now, where they're just taking away people's guns. Look at the UK, where they pretty much strip most citizens of their ability to have guns. In order to have a gun there, I'm pretty sure you have to be a member of a gun club, which have like strict membership guidelines. And
or you can have hunting rifles. You can do that. That is a thing you can have. And you can have shotguns, but they have to be for express purposes, only to be used at certain times.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure you have to be a member of a gun club. Or that might be, I mean, I might be confusing certain EU countries' as laws with theirs. But also, you know, that like, I'm crossing streams here. Give me a second. But the overall, like, if you look at like the persecution of people like Philip Ludi in the late 90s, where he's like, okay, well, ultimately his entire contention was, in order to have effective gun control, you'd have to also be able to go after people for their speech, right? Because at the end of the day, making a gun is technical knowledge, and technical knowledge can be transmitted by words, by text, by print. And so he wrote a book, Expedient Homemade Firearms, and where he teaches the reader how to make a 9mm submachine gun. And the Crown went after him for this. I think one of the things they attempted to charge him with, after he had already spent like 4 years in prison for possessing a collection of tubes and piping that could be assembled feasibly into a firearm, right? Another thing they were trying to charge him with was the dissemination of materials that could be misused by terrorists, right? Ultimately, ultimately,
I just think of Jay Stark.
Say again?
I mean, I just think of Jay Stark.
Oh yeah, he's the more modern version of Philip Ludi, although German. The thing is, who did these people hurt? Like, who did Philip Ludi hurt? Who did Jay Stark hurt? Who did I forgot the guy in New York. What's his name? The guy in New York who just got sentenced to Rikers Island for 15 years for making 3D printed ghost guns. I forgot his name. Damn it, give me a second.
Oh, I don't remember now.
A guy sentenced to Rikers Island.
Ah, yes, the editor's cutting room floor section. I love this part.
Yeah. Ghost guns. What's his name? What is his name?
Be right back. I gotta grab a sweater or something.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not. It's crazy how difficult this is. Dexter Taylor. That's the guy's name. Dexter Taylor.
Dexter Taylor.
Yeah, Dexter Taylor. He's a black man, a retired software engineer in New York, and they fucking busted him for making some ghost guns for his own personal use, and now he's declared a felon in the state of New York, and he's on Rikers Island simply because he dared to manufacture some guns. Like, who did he hurt?
The government. That's who.